That's the kind of thing we've got going.
Good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Ranch in Taos, New Mexico, working on an oil painting Angel Fire. Alright, today I've just mixed up a little bit of cadmium yellow light, some magenta, and a bit of white to start detailing the fluffy edges of the clouds. So, get fluffy here. It's pretty good, I guess. If I move to the top. Alright, I'm going to focus on the middle area for the moment. And remind me to pan out if I move. Alright.
Without a battle or without a major shift in the way things work, it seems like some of that you take on yourself instead. Well, I think the hope comes from Europe. I think America will just be shamed into legalization.
Alright, more higher than I think. I have it even kind of referencing the television, so I need to. The television has the photo of the actual sunset, which is only going to be loosely based on, but you know, it's got some pretty extraordinary details and some of the small clouds I really want to try and capture there.
I took her to the beach and she immediately whipped her top off. And then I had to explain that you couldn't do that in America. And she'd said she'd heard you couldn't do that in America, but she couldn't believe that it was actually true. And then when I was looking at her, thought what it would take to make it possible to take your top off at a public beach in America, you just realize this is a society of lost souls. I mean, this is a society of the screwballs that couldn't handle the secularization of Europe and came here to practice what they called religious freedom, which basically meant crypto-fascism on everybody else, you know. Yeah, I agree. Look, black people didn't break loose till they got their backs up. Gay people would have been forever marginalized. They're not handing rights out in this society. You have to take it. And the drug thing has just been a polite conversation for far too long, I think. It's getting a little louder, but weasel arguments are being used. I mean, the reason cannabis is moving toward legalization is because an appeal is being made to the darkest impulses of capitalism. You know, you could make so much money off this. What do you care that it's a drug? What about the flip side of the race, though, and that responsibility? I sometimes wonder, as much as we like to complain about law and structure, it seems like we also rely on that to provide certain social structures around how something would be. We don't often claim the responsibility. How do you see, let's say, if drugs were legalized, how would we self-manage in a responsible way to make that occur? Well, I maintain that since alcohol and tobacco are legal, we have already proven that we can absorb the social consequences of legalizing any drug. I mean, if you can tolerate the costs and what alcohol and all that does to insurance, then heroin is going to pose no problem. The problem with the law is that when the law becomes irrational, the law loses its moral force. And so it has to be reformed. And this is, I believe, very difficult in this drug area because nobody's being straight about what's at issue. The real issue, like let's take cannabis, which is, you know, most people, whether they smoke cannabis or not, have the impression, I think, that this is a generally benign and over-discussed peril. And yet, I cannot imagine America legalizing cannabis simply because its psychological consequences are that it erodes loyalty to the work ethic. You know, people are not interested in screwing widgets on wonkles if they smoke, and contrast it
to caffeine. Now, caffeine is a dangerous drug, does liver damage, is known to be implicated in a number of pathologies. And yet, every labor contract signed in the Western world enshrines the right of laborers twice a day to stop the assembly line and tank up on coffee. This is an extraordinary folkway. And why? Because caffeine is a made-to-order drug for the purposes of slave capitalism. I mean, you just scurry right back to your keyboard or your assembly line, and you can do the 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. shift then without, falling on your face like a normal primate would if they weren't jacked up on some alkaloid. And so that's very welcome. It was McLuhan who made the point, and it still hasn't been assimilated by enough people, that he said that technologies carry a hidden agenda and shape their user in ways that the user is never conscious of. And the great case that McLuhan made was print, which he said the linear and uniform nature of print created the preconditioned mindset able to accept democracy, the assembly line, the concept of the citizen. A whole bunch of modern ideas presuppose print. Well, drugs are technologies, and they shape the users in ways that the users never suspect. And our frenzied, goal-oriented, surface-obsessed society is a society of sugar, alcohol, red meat, and television. Television is an incredibly invasive and powerful drug. The average American watches 6 hours a day. Imagine if, following World War II, a drug had been introduced, that now the average American spent 6 hours a day absolutely loaded on this drug, doing nothing else. But because we are materialists, we don't see television as a drug, and yet, your blood pools in your rear end, your brain waves fall into a measurable zone, you fixate. There is an entire set of symptoms, no less dramatic than the symptoms of smoking a bomb or honking up a line. But we don't see television that way. And the horror of television is you don't even get to have your own trip. You have somebody else's trip, sponsored by the cosmetically enhanced surfaces of products. Talk about a hell drug, my God. Yeah.
So since it's an extreme minority of people who are using psychedelics right now on the planet, you see this little minute portion scattered around really having an effect, which causes some sort of chain reaction before it's too late to really work some change? Or is it more like small colonies of the same kind of?
Well, if it were business as usual, these psychedelic communities might not amount to anything. But I think that the world is going to get so peculiar as the chickens come home to roost that you'll have to take psychedelic drugs to understand what's going on. And that the people who don't will be running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Because we haven't come, people yak about the apocalypse, but this is not the apocalypse. This is the garden party before the apocalypse. Once it really hits, it's going to require a great deal of faith to believe that we're going to make it through it. And I think that more and more organizations, governments, governing institutions are going to turn to the fringes for answers. Because what our circumstance is that history failed, orthodoxy failed, science failed, capitalism failed, reason failed. And we can't keep practicing these ship is sinking. We can't have a debate about when we'll arrive in Bermuda. We're never going to arrive in Bermuda. The boat is now sinking. So the agenda has to change. And also, these people are dying off. You know, the old control freaks, the people who had one foot in the 19th century. As to your question of whether or not it will happen fast enough, well, that's the horse race we're involved in. That's the excitement, you know. It'll be a photo finish. H.G. Wells said history is a race between education and catastrophe.
Yeah, and the other thing, Christianity took 300 years to become, you know, and it started off with different sects of people that were nurturing the Christian idea. Unfortunately, Roman Catholics back one, but it could be the same thing. We could start these little sort of copy classes of peyote takers that just...
Well, and Christianity was able to do that in a world where information moved at the speed of a horse's gallop. So, you know, there's an enormous psychedelic religion flourishing in Brazil right now that just cannot convert people fast enough, is missionaryizing the United States. Shamanism. See, I think the reason I called my second book The Archaic Revival is because I think this is the overarching metaphor of the 20th century, that the 19th century was the gentleman's century, the white gentleman, when it all worked. Commerce flourished, cities were built, the poor knew their place, brown people held their position. And the 20th century has been all about confronting the bankruptcy of all of that. And from the time of surrealism and Freud and Jung and Dada, right through to rave music and jazz and rock and roll and abstract expressionism, these are all archaic impulses. You know, the 19th century is all about realism, materialism, and defined social structures. The 20th century deconstructs the visual image, deconstructs the idea of simple location. We have body piercing, we have trance dancing, fire walking. All of these things are impulses to return to the primitive. And what it means is that in the aura of the realization that history has failed, we're going back to an earlier model. This is what societies do when they get in trouble. You know, we forget because we're the inheritors of it. But when medieval Christianity essentially got a flat tire by having 70 popes in 25 years, none of them died a natural death, that clued people to the idea that there was something wrong with Christian idealism. And the Renaissance capitalists, Italian city-state entrepreneurs, invented classicism. Classicism, meaning a society based on the ideals of Greece and Rome, was a science fiction option at that point. Greece and Rome had been buried in the ground for 1,500 years, and yet they dug it up. They dug up the buildings, they dug up the manuscripts, they dug it all up, and they said, this is how people should live, and we'll found classicism, and we will be the patrons of the arts, and we will undertake vast architectural undertakings, and so forth and so on. And it worked. It set a model for society, Roman law, Greek aesthetics, clear into the middle of the 19th century, when then the full consequences of the Industrial Reformation created, a kind of new serfdom of some sort. Now, we require such a radical a new paradigm that we have to reach outside the domain of history entirely. And the archaic, then, which is a model of nomadism, of very little material culture, of hedonism, a lot of focus on sexuality, sensuality, body adornment, this sort of thing. an information-based culture ruled by magic. In the case of the archaic, it was natural magic. In our case, it will be the technological magic of electromagnetic technology. You know, a global tribe. McLuhan was right. I mean, McLuhan is given zilch credit. He understood all of this stuff. He said all of this by 1965. The people who dismissed him never understood him, I'm quite convinced. Yeah.
What spores the mushrooms will play in this global electronic network?
Well, I think that part of what we're on the brink of is a technological innovation, but I think also a rewiring of the human organism, and that what psilocybin is about is it's a catalyst for language production and evolution, and that the future evolution of language involves language being shifted into the visual domain. Notice how more visual reality is becoming, how icon-driven the computer interface is and stuff like this. I think that psychedelics hold the way toward a kind of telepathy, not a telepathy of you hear my thoughts, but a telepathy of I see what you mean. This would erode boundaries tremendously. I mean, it's astonishing to think that our global civilization is linked together by nothing more than small mouth noises and the electronic transduction of same. I mean, small mouth noises are a very, very crude way to communicate the kind of complexity that our scene requires. The great thing about psychedelics is whether these personalities are realized or less than realized is that you don't need them. You know, the realized ones can be your friends, but the great thing about the psychedelic enterprise is that it's democratic and self-directed. And actually, my experience is that if you really take high doses, it's hard to be a rat. You have to have incredible defenses to be a real rat and take real high doses. And what it means is sooner or later it will ambush you in some tremendously unpleasant way, and then you will get straight. I think it's tremendously exciting because it's a chance to take control of the project of defining one's own authenticity. And I don't really, the idea of the guide, I'm glad that concept has given way to the idea of the sitter, because the sitter gets it much better. What the sitter is there to do is to keep you from rolling off the bed and to tell you that it's going to be all right, even though the sitter may have lost all confidence that it will ever be all right. And they are guiding you nowhere because they haven't the faintest idea where you are. You know, they're just there to reassure. Guided trips are as often ambiguous, I think, as positive. You know, I know a guy who takes mushrooms fairly often, and he always says to me, he says, each time I take it, my goal is to stand more. And what he means is that there's no bottom to it, and it will reveal literally as much as you can tolerate. And you know, you can get into a lock with it where you say, show me what you really are. Show me what you really are for yourself. And instantly, the cheerful scenarios of machine elves dancing mice and little candies spinning against black backgrounds, that's like suspended. And there's this organ tone, like from the Bach B minor Mass, and these black velvet curtains begin to lift. And after about 15 seconds of that, you say, that's enough, thank you, of what you really are for yourself, because you realize it is it is willing to comply with the request, but your mind can't handle it. It is coming at you through a series of veils. It is trying to be reassuring. I mean, you're saying, my God, it's an alien from the heart of the galaxy, and what it's trying to pass as is your next-door neighbor. Because if it were ever to reveal the true dimensions of its alienness, you would probably vaporize in the presence of such peculiarity. Death by astonishment. We want to avoid that at all costs. Stories abound. I mean, stories upon stories, amazing stories. And once you collect enough of them, you start collecting them thinking that there's going to be a pattern where you will learn something. Eventually you realize these stories are just designed to befuddle and lead you astray. I mean, you cannot tell what is going on.
Put together the stories, you probably do one day.
Yeah, I've considered it great trick stories. Trading with the aliens. Some of you may know a wonderful little story by Clifford Simak. I was talking to somebody about this recently. It was about a man who goes to a garage sale and he buys an oak roll-top desk. And he gets it home and he discovers that he just notices actually that in one corner of this desk there's what looks like an ivory dot, an inlay of ivory. And he then has this desk, and after a couple of months, he finds this thing on this dot, which he doesn't know what it is. It's just some little thing he can't figure it out. And he discovers, to make a long story short, that if he will put something on this dot, it will be traded. And so he puts a paper clip and he gets a something or other. And then he puts a dime and he gets something else every 24 hours. And he begins trading through this alien trader. They are meme traders, these creatures from hyperspace. And the trick is to get them to trade something that's very useful to you and valueless to them. I grew up in western Colorado, and up above 9,000 or 10,000 feet in the old mining camps, there are what are called pack rats. And what pack rats are about is they steal stuff. They steal little things, but they always leave something. They are trader rats. They don't actually steal. And there are many stories about people getting in league with a pack rat and trading 7-Up bottle caps for gold nuggets that were hidden in the walls, that because of these old mining towns, these rats have been stealing from the bar tills of a century ago. And so this is and the strange thing is when you trade with a pack rat, you have to discern its psychology, because it may trade 7-Up bottle caps for gold nuggets, but if you switch to dimes, it will switch to dead bees, and they're no good to you. So you have to keep negotiating, you see, to get the good, and Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. Although somebody pointed out to me, it was another one of these torpedoes, unexpected, that print is visible language. That print is the condensation of sound. It's just that it requires a medium. Yeah.
I was wondering what you pointed out about the possibilities of asking to keep this thought itself,
Alright, so that accomplishes basically nothing in this session. It's going to take many sessions like this with a small brush to detail, as I want it to be, to set up this background right. So that's going to be how this one is, a little bit at a time. That's it for the moment. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Angel Fire. Hold on 1 second, I'll get a zoom in on if I can get my strap off the tripod. Oh shit, and not fall over with a sleepy leg. There we go. Alright. So that sort of sets up a little bit of detail cloud
start pulling and
starting to
pushing
creep in on that
buttons.
upper
I
edge
had a bit of
and across
when
this
I
dark
was
spot
younger,
here.
We messed around in more
So,
radical
anyway,
ways, and
I'll probably keep working with that since I still have some paint, and this one will just go in chunks in the final process video, I think. So, have a good night, Earth. That's Adam Sturch, Mushroom Mansion. Did I already say that? Probably. So, there it is.